Some of you may have heard me yell at people at our other gatherings, but I understand the senator is on her way, and I want to make a few preliminary comments so when she gets here we can move right into what y'all came here for. Next thing, I want to make it clear, my position as the chairman is to make sure that we run a fair game for all the participants in this decathlon that we apparently have now, okay? We will treat each candidate with respect, and the committee will not endorse anyone. Individuals on the committee can work for anyone they choose for as a private citizen, not as the committee. I will not work for anybody other than for the committee and for the Democratic Party in Cheshire County to make sure we're running a fair game here, all right? That's very important to me. We will post events for any candidate who's running as a Democrat on our website and so forth. So those will be there no matter who they are. So that's another element. The last thing I want to just sort of say is the theme I think is very important for us this year if we are going to rid ourselves of the blight of this presidency is civility. We need to treat each other with civility throughout the campaign and come out of this together. For those of you who are not familiar with this senator, she's an attorney, she was a judicial clerk, she works at HUD as a special counsel, which should be instant credibility. Their special counsels are in right now. She was elected to the House from a district in upstate New York, not too far from where I was born and raised. And so I can verify it was a pretty conservative district. She then was appointed to the Senate in 2009, and then elected in 2010, 2012, and 2018. I've been very impressed with her career all along, and what I really find is she's someone who actually seems to represent the people who sent her somewhere, all right, which is usually to Washington. And I think that's an admirable quality. And so without any further ado, I'm just going to turn things over to the Senator. Senator, welcome.
Wow, what an amazing room. Thank you for coming. We were going to have a house party, but if we had it here, we could have so many of you more join us. So thank you for being here. I'm delighted to be in Keene. Thank you for all the work you do for our local Democrats, Carl. It makes a huge difference. I really appreciate being in the state of the first primary of the country. I understand how much you care about our democracy and how seriously you take this process, so I feel delighted to be part of it. I have my husband and 10-year-old on their way, and when they come in, I'll introduce them so I can make Henry blush. But they'll be here shortly, and I'll get to introduce them. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, and then why I'm running and why I think I can win. Good?
Yes.
All right. So I grew up in upstate New York, a rural area, not unlike this one. I got my start in politics largely because my grandmother loved politics. She was a woman who never went to college. She was a secretary. She worked from the time she was 20 years old on. She was a secretary in our state legislature and recognized 75 years ago that all the legislators were men and all the support staff were women. And she wanted to have a say. And so she figured out the best way to have a say was to organize women to get involved in politics. She asked them to go door to door, to stuff envelopes, to make phone calls. And she taught them how to find candidates that shared their values, support them, and really be instrumental in winning elections. And so I remember as a 10-year-old girl being in my first campaign headquarters at a long table like this with a bunch of ladies stuffing envelopes, and knowing in my heart I wanted to be just like them. And Henry's arrived. This is my 10-year-old Henry. His first political event on the presidential campaign trail. My husband, Jonathan, right there. My wonderful husband. This is also his first event on the campaign trail. My other son is off at school, but we got to see him last night, so that was a real blessing. Okay, so I'm telling the story of how I got my start in politics. Okay. So my grandmother really inspired me by taking me into this world, and I met all these women who had been just working really hard for what they believed in, that their voices mattered, and that what they did with their time mattered, and that grassroots activism could actually make a difference. And so I was really schooled at a young age to understand how important this process is. I wanted to be in public service someday. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but my 7-year-old self was at least, had enough bravado to say, someday I want to be a senator. I didn't know what a senator was. I'm certain I was thinking of a state senator, but it took another 30 years to admit that and to say that out loud again. It wasn't until I was a young lawyer in New York City and I noticed that Hillary Clinton was our first lady and went to China. Now, I went to school in New Hampshire. I went to Dartmouth College. At Dartmouth, I was an Asian studies major. I learned to speak Mandarin. I lived in dorms in Beijing. So when Hillary was there giving that big speech about women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, I was pissed I wasn't invited. I was like, why am I not at this big event? Because I'm the Asian studies major from China. I should do this. And I realized at that moment as a young lawyer that I wasn't invited to that conference because I wasn't involved in politics. And so I thought, God, I really want to get involved because I wish I was there. And so I reached out to a friend whose mom was involved in politics and said, what do I do? How do I get involved in New York City? I didn't know. I wasn't from New York City. I didn't know much about it. And they said, join this women's group called the Women's Leadership Forum, arm of the DNC, raise money for presidential candidates. But first meeting I go to, women who've been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And they showed me the ropes, and they showed me exactly how to get involved in modern day campaigns, how to help campaigns, how to organize, how to raise money, all the things that campaigns need. And so that started me on a very different trajectory. I was so excited. I was working on campaigns in all my free time. I'd be working hard late at night at the law firm, but all my free time was organizing women, organizing lawyers, asking them to participate, and finding candidates that shared my values. And over that 10 years, I finally worked up the courage to actually run for office. And the interesting thing about this is that's when Jonathan came into my life. So I'm sorry, Jonathan, I'm going to tell him a little about you. So I was a young lawyer, working endless hours, and I really wanted to do public service. And I didn't know how to do it. I couldn't get from A to B. I first tried to work at the U.S. Attorney's Office, didn't get the job. Then I tried to work at a not-for-profit, Ford Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, couldn't even get an interview. Then Hillary Clinton decides to run for Senate. I thought, oh my gosh, this is my chance. I'm going to work on a campaign full time. I go and interview. I have no relevant experience. And so I didn't get the job. And I was so frustrated. I went to a big event of Democrats. Andrew Cuomo was the speaker. He was talking about why it's important to be a Democrat, why it's important to do public service. And by this time, I'm so annoyed because I've been trying for a year and a half to get a public service job and failing. And so I kind of go up to him afterwards and say, well, Mr. Secretary, all well and good, but I've been trying to get a job in public service and not getting there. And he said, well, will you move to Washington? Now, I had no intention of ever moving to Washington because I had this great boyfriend in Jonathan in New York, and I had this great job. But I said, of course I'd move to Washington. Sure enough, I go down, get interviewed, I get this job offer, and I have to decide. And I go home, and I'm my then boyfriend, I say, I just got this big job offer, and what do you think? And Jonathan, God puts the right people in your life for a reason. And Jonathan said, well, all you've ever said to me since I've known you is that you want to do public service. Of course you should take this job. I'll see you on weekends. Your fancy law firm doesn't need you. Go. Sure enough, I go, I give my law firm 2 weeks notice, off I go to Washington, and I start my public service career. I love it. I'm jumping out of bed every morning, can't wait to do the work. Helping people, figuring out how to make housing more affordable, all these things. And sure enough, Jonathan came down every weekend. And sure enough, 6 months later, we got engaged. So when I got back to New York, because Bush v. Gore, all those public service jobs were gone, no more appointed positions, I thought, oh, I really love this. What am I going to do? Because you couldn't stay in Washington. We all lost. And I thought, I really want to run for office. And I was, a lot of women have challenges when they decide to run for office. They don't, not sure they're tough enough, smart enough, right, good enough. And I again turned to Jonathan, and he just had graduated from Columbia with his MBA, and he was working in venture capital. And so after we got engaged, I said, well, honey, I really would love to raise our family in upstate New York, and I'd really love to maybe run for office someday. What do you think about it? Now, when I asked this question to Jonathan, you have to recognize there's not much venture capital in upstate New York. And he said, for whatever reason, sure, I would love to. And so we bought a home, we moved upstate, we lived there, practiced law up there, and eventually I ran for Congress. Now my congressional district was red, super red. 2-to-1 Republican, in fact. And when I wanted to run, I called my friend who's a pollster, and I said, Jeffrey, I'd love to run for Congress in this district. Can you look it up for me and tell me what you think? And he did. And he said, well, I'm sorry, Kirsten, you really can't win. And I was like, really? What happens if I raise $2 million and get my message out? Clearly I can win. He said, no. He said, it's 2-1 Republican. You cannot win that district. I said, well, what happens if I run the perfect campaign? Clearly I can win that. If I get my message out and run the perfect campaign, I can win. And he said, no. He said, there's more cows than Democrats in that district. And being the lawyer that I am and quite pushy, I said, well, what happens if he gets indicted? Clearly I can win then. And he said, well, it depends what he gets indicted for. So that was my district, and truly the only person who thought I could win was my mother. God bless my mother, because she believed in me. We ran not really the perfect campaign. We tried to run the perfect campaign. We did raise the $2 million, and he never took me seriously. He was the bully of all bullies. He just said, oh, she's just a pretty face. I said, thank you. Let's talk about getting out of Iraq. And so I was able to really talk past him and disregard his sexism and his bullying and never taking me seriously. And the best thing it did for me is all the women in the district said, why is he being so mean to her? And what does she stand for? And why is she running? And it made me relevant. And so the miracles do happen. I win that district by 6 points. So I run for re-election, and in our lifetime, so at my first election, Theo, my 15-year-old, was 3 when I got elected. But in my first term in Congress, I got pregnant with Henry. And so I'm walking around the district very large, with the toddler, very large. And I have Henry in the middle of my first term. And my opponent decides to spend $7 million, almost all on negative ads. And these ads were brutal. They were mean. They were very, very nasty. Like the pictures of my face going up in flames, saying she's not who you think she is. And the truth is, I learned a truism in politics. As I'm walking around this district with the infant and the toddler, you cannot win a political campaign by running negative ads against a young mother with a toddler and an infant. Because nobody believes you at all. So nobody believed me, and I beat him by a 24-point margin. So it goes to one of the things I said I was going to tell you about why I'm going to win. I'm not afraid of bullies. Bullies, I will talk past them. They will never define me. They can try as hard as they can to insult me, to degrade me, to reduce me to nothing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Because it's not about who you're fighting against. It's all about who you're fighting for. And if you know in your heart what you're fighting for and why the issues that you're fighting for are so hard or about, you don't lose your way. You just don't. Any day you feel like, I don't think I can go on, I can't stand this is not going well, if you just think for a moment the person you're fighting for. If you're fighting for women who are sexually assaulted in the military, who will give their life for this country, and are not only brutally raped, but then disbelieved and then retaliated against for coming forward. I don't get tired. They don't get tired, I don't get tired. I don't mind standing up to every general in the U.S. military telling them to their face that they are wrong. And if they think they can't take this decision out of the chain of command because it undermines good order and discipline, well, I say back to them, how can 20,000 rapes last year be good order and discipline? And that's the truth. And that is the truth of what's happening in Congress today, in Washington today. We need to take on the powerful interests, the institutions that decide everything. You know, if you're worried about health care as a right and not a privilege, well, then you have to be willing to take on the insurance companies. When you have a healthcare system that's built entirely on a entirely on a for-profit insurance company, you will never get to universal coverage that's affordable. It's not possible because the interest of that industry is to make money by law. They have shareholders. They're obligated to actually give those quarterly returns. They pay their CEOs tens of millions of dollars. And so all that money we're paying to the middleman, the insurance industry, it's just fat. It's an enormous layer of fat in the system that is meaning that money isn't going to healthcare. It's not going to your hospital, it's not going to your doctor, it's not going to your healthcare provider, it's not. And so it's just wasted. And so that's why I believe in Medicare for all. When I ran for that 2-to-1 Republican district in upstate New York, I ran on Medicare for all. I made it really clear to people, if you want to buy in at a price you can afford, you should have access no matter what. Medicare should be for everyone. As a basic competition in the system to drive down costs. Those insurance companies, they're going to raise your rates every quarter because they can. Those drug companies are going to raise the price of your drugs every year because they can. Those private equity firms will buy the drugs and the makers that might have monopolies or near monopolies so they can raise the rate through the roof and charge you $1,000 for an EpiPen or whatever they want to charge. That's what they do. That's how it happens. And so you have to be willing to take on these fights. I believe I have the courage to do that. I believe I have the compassion to do it. I believe I have the fearless determination that is necessary to root out the greed and corruption that controls everything in Washington. We don't pass gun reform in this country because of the NRA. But it's not about the Second Amendment or hunters' rights. Let me be really clear. It's about the gun manufacturers that fund the NRA that want to sell more weapons. They don't care if they're selling a gun to a teenager, an assault rifle, a military-style assault rifle to a teenager in Walmart. They don't care if they're selling a gun to a terrorist on the terrorist watch list. They don't care that they're selling a gun to someone who has grave mental illness and a violent record, or someone with a criminal conviction of a violent crime. And that's why they oppose universal background checks. It's why they don't want basically a federal anti-trafficking law so guns can't be trafficked into our communities just through bad gun dealers and people who want to sell guns to gang members. Like that happens in my state all the time. They just don't care. They just want to have those quarterly profits. And that's not capitalism, actually. It's called greed. So let's name it for what it is. When you put the interest of money over people, so I intend to run against the reasons why we can't have health care as a right, not a privilege. And we can't have better public schools. And we can't have affordable college. And we can't have debt-free college. I believe that every American who wants to be working hard should have whatever job training they need to get that job that will let them earn their way into the middle class. We should have full employment. And I know your unemployment rate is really low in New Hampshire. It's 1.8 I last read. But how many people do you know are underemployed? How many people do you know who, if they had better job training, they'd be earning more for their family? How many people do you know who are working 1, 2, or 3 jobs but are still below the poverty line, or still struggling to make ends meet? One car problem, one health condition, one death in the family can destroy everything. So you got to take on these things. You got to take on things like institutional racism. And this is important for New Hampshire as much as anywhere else in the country. When you have a cash bail system, most Americans don't have a lot of savings. And if you have one arrest and that cash bail system basically says you're going to be incarcerated if you can't pay bail, well, you just didn't show up to work the next day, so you're now fired. And so now you get further and further into debt and further down the slope of misery. So why don't we take that on and say it doesn't make sense? It doesn't make sense for who we are as Americans. So that's why I think I can win. I can fight the tough battles. I can take on the real problems. I won't give up. I've never given up. I'll take on the banks. I'll take on corporate America when they're wrong. I voted against the bank bailout twice as a Congress member from New York. I'll stand up to my party when they're wrong. And this is a tough issue because a lot of people are really sad about Senator Franken. I'm still sad about Senator Franken. But the truth about that is he had 8 credible allegations that were corroborated in real time. The 8th one happened to be a congressional staffer whose boss we knew. I'm a mom of boys. I was having conversations with my 15-year-old Theo. Theo was saying, "Mom, why are you so tough on Al Franken?" Like, Theo, let's be really clear. You can't grope a woman anywhere on her body without her consent. You may not forcibly kiss a woman ever without her consent. It's not okay for you. It's not okay for Senator Franken. And so my decision in that was to not remain silent. And that was my choice. Either to continue to stay silent, make excuses, carry water of something that is not right, or say it's not okay with me. Senator Franken's decision was to do whatever he wanted. He could have sat the next 6 months and served and gone through his ethics committee. He could have sued every woman who made an allegation against him. Those are his choices. My choice is not to remain silent. So I will stand up to do what's right, even when it's hard. especially when it's hard. And I think we need a president who will do that. Thank you. Question you need.
Let's start over here. Okay, I've been asked a referee question.
Yes, you.
So
That would be good.
there.
Please do. Then I don't get in trouble for favorites.
That's a quick hand. I like it.
Yeah. What do you consider the single most critical issue facing the United States today, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, there's a lot, but I'll start with global climate change, and then I'll go to the So, I think the greatest risk we have to humanity is global climate change. And I think we need bold leadership to actually address it. I think that we should look at it the way John F. Kennedy looked at the moonshot. When he said we need to go to the moon in the next 10 years, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, and it would be a measure of who we are as Americans, our innovation and entrepreneurialism, that was a call to action to the American people. Not what America can do for you, but what you can do for America. And it was a really inspiring call to action. We should have the very same call to action to address global climate change. We should be supporting the framework and the ideals behind a Green New Deal because it is bold enough and it is visionary enough to get where we have to go. And what I like about some of the ideas people are talking about today is they are exciting, and there are things we've been working on for 10 years that we can build on. So when you're talking about the economy and you're talking about the Green New Deal, we are great inventors. This country has always been at the forefront of every technology. We're the ones who invented solar, we invented wind, geothermal, hydropower, biofuels. We built it, we invested in it, except for the last 10 years. We let every single tax credit expire. We don't actually understand how businesses work. And so the solar industry and the wind industry, they couldn't survive in state after state. So where'd they go? Where'd they go? China. And you know what happens when you're at the forefront of manufacturing? You get to innovate. You're at the forefront of next generation of that technology. So we're losing our edge to China because we don't have the vision to say, let's be at the forefront of green energy. Let's actually create an economy around green energy. And it works because we have a school in upstate New York, one of our SUNY schools, that's entirely focused on green jobs. And so they teach the kids how to build LEED certified housing, how to install thermal windows, how to build wind turbines and solar panels, how to do anything in green energy. And when I toured the school a couple of years ago, they said 98% of their seniors had 3 or more job offers before graduation. It's a jobs program. So if you really think hard and long about it, if you commit to really inspiring green energy technologies, you're going to actually get to a renewable future. You have to take clean air and clean water seriously, making sure that we care about poisoned water all across the country. We have PFOA here. You have PFAS here in New Hampshire. We have it in New York. We have the biggest Superfund site in the country, the Hudson River, because of PCBs. We have to make sure every person has access to clean air and clean water. We need to make sure we clean up the brownfields. We need to make sure that we invest in infrastructure. I know New Hampshire would benefit from more rail lines. I know you would benefit from high-speed rail. New York certainly would. And having investments in mass transit actually works. Building infrastructure actually works. New York, we have $70 billion of unmet sewer needs. I don't know how much you have here, but I bet it's significant too. Water infrastructure, it's really important. So that's what the Green New Deal has. I would add to that though. I would add putting a price on carbon. Because the truth is, if you use market forces wisely, and you create competition, and you say you're going to be rewarded for your innovation, you're going to be rewarded for your entrepreneurialism, and the young scientists and inventors of America will figure it out. They'll figure out how to be energy efficient and how to use next technologies, and they'll get an actual financial benefit for it. So I would take on global climate change directly. And for those who don't understand why it's important, you just have to look at what's happened in this country over the last few years. Look at how many people died in those fires in California. We didn't get out in time. My state really suffered. We had Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Lee. People died. I met a mom and a dad who, the dad was a first responder, so when Superstorm Sandy hit, he had to go work and help and protect people. And he told his wife, honey, get in the car. and go to your mom's to be safe. She gets in the minivan, straps her 2 little boys in, and there was a 10-foot swell that came over Staten Island, and it just flooded the car, and so she had to stop. And so she got out of the car, and the wave was so strong, it literally just took her boys out of her arms. So that's the truth of global climate change. People die, and communities are devastated. And for anybody who doesn't believe it's real, just have them talk to a family who suffered because of the violent storms we have today, because of the extraordinary weather changes we've had. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. So that would be it.
Thank you.
I have a lot of other agenda items, which I'll address in other questions.
I'm going to go right here. Next, yes.
What is the first thing you would do when you get into the Oval Office after fumigating the White House?
Yeah, I was thinking Clorox wipes myself, because I'm a mother, so you do all the handles. So I think we need to restore our leadership in the world, restore our institutions. One of the worst things that President Trump has done is he spewed hate and division all across this country. Hate crimes have increased no matter where you live. Certainly in my state, we've seen hate crimes against Jewish Americans, against blacks, against LGBTQ community members. We just see an escalation of hate against immigrants, against Muslims. With his Muslim ban, he doesn't believe in freedom of religion, that's his Muslim ban. He doesn't believe in the importance of the independence of the judiciary, so he attacks judges, calls Supreme Court judges Republican or Democratic judges. He doesn't understand the balance of powers. He attacks the independence of the press, the free press, by demonizing press outlets that don't speak of him favorably. So he's destroying our institutions. So that needs to be restored. When he walks away from the global climate accords, it's a problem because the world, the country, we look to the president, look to our country on what's right. We are the beacon of light and hope. When we turn our backs on immigrants, when we turn our backs on refugees seeking our help, well, what do you think the Statue of Liberty stands for? She's part of America. She's part of our story. She's got her beacon of light and hope. She says, send us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. It's what's made this country great. We're founded by immigrants. Our diversity's always been our strength. We've never been afraid of refugees. Why is he creating so much fear? Why are moms all across America afraid of criminals and gang members coming across the border? Because the president told them to be afraid. We're not a fearful country. So we need to heal. We need to heal who we are. We need to remember that this country was based on caring about our neighbor, caring about one another. We believe in the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Care about the least among us. So that needs to be restored. So I want to restore the integrity of our nation and our leadership in the world. I want to restore the moral fabric that's being literally ripped apart. I want to restore the humanity and care that we once had towards our neighbor. And once you do that, then you can reach across the aisle. You can talk to everyone about common sense solutions like healthcare is a right, not a privilege, better public schools, better economy, all that comes. But you've got to restore what's been lost and recognize we all love our children. So start from a place of common ground and build from there, and then get things done for the American people.
Over here.
Senator, the Middle East presents a wide variety of complicated tensions. Could you mention a couple of steps you would take, specific steps you would take?
In the Middle East?
Yes, please.
So I pledged yesterday I would not use single-use bottles anymore. Day one, see how it goes. I'm really committed. Okay. So the first issue I would start with is Syria. I think Syria, we need a political and diplomatic solution more than a military solution. I don't think President Trump even has the authorization to have our 2,000 troops there, the ones that he's planning to take out without the support and help of our allies. But we would need an authorization for use of military force for any more troop investments in the Middle East. I I think the worst thing we've done on Syria is not addressed the refugee crisis. Turning a blind eye, turning to an indifference, I think is morally wrong and bad for our national security, and I'll explain. I took a trip a few years ago now, a bipartisan trip with other senators, and we actually went to the refugee camps in Turkey of the Syrian refugees. We went and met with King of Jordan and talked about the refugee crisis in Jordan. But in this one refugee camp we were in, I met with mothers, and they came and sat down in front of us, and this woman looks us 5 senators in the eye with tears in her eyes and says, "You are afraid of Osama bin Laden? Your lack of care or concern for what's happening here is creating thousands of Osama bin Ladens every day." So if you care about rooting out terrorism and keeping America safe, you really need to care about the refugee crisis. And you need to work much more intensely with our allies on diplomatic resolutions. With regard to Israel, I support Israel. I believe that they are our greatest ally in the Middle East, as its only democracy. And I think we need a two-state solution. And I would like America to focus far more on bringing the parties together in a path for peace as we support Israel and make sure they are protected and safe. But the solution for a safe Israel is a two-state solution where both parties are at the table working towards the humanity of creating opportunity for all. With regard to Saudi Arabia, I think that the fact that President Trump is unwilling to hold the Saudi Arabian government accountable for the Khashoggi murder is an outrage. I think the fact that Saudi Arabia is not being brought to the table to work towards dealing with the refugee crisis in Syria, stopping the enormous assault in Yemen, I think is a huge problem. I think we are not standing up for our values as a country, and we are not willing to hold an ally accountable when they're wrong. And I think that's one of the greatest failings of President Trump. Anything else on that area? Is that enough?
No, look back there, gentlemen. Yeah.
Has the orange dude given you a nickname yet?
No, they did call me a lightweight.
You're getting there.
I'm working on that. I'm working on it. Thank you.
Back there? Yeah.
Thank you. 29.
That's young to us.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Stephen. I'm from Concord, and I'm an ACLU voter because civil liberties are important to me in this upcoming election. An issue that's really important to me in this upcoming election is voting rights.
Yeah.
I want to know if you support an effort to pass a modern Voting Rights Act that reduces barriers to voting and instead incentivizes states to adapt same-day and automatic voter registration, make poll sites and hours more convenient, and expand early and mail-in voting.
Yes, I will. I'm working on that. I carry the voting rights legislation that John Lewis wrote in the House. I am the lead sponsor in the Senate, and it has about 10 reforms about how to improve voting rights. Some of the easiest things that we could do on a bipartisan basis, voter registration online. It'd be one of the quickest, simplest things. Several states already have it. Even red states like South Carolina already has it. So there's no reason why we couldn't pass that one piece right away. And that will help with a presidential election because a lot of the challenges in the lines that people face is because they have trouble in their registration. There's something wrong, and that's one of the biggest causes for lines. The other thing that I think we can start doing state by state is early voting. I think it's really important that people can vote early at any time so that they're not disenfranchised because they have to work on Tuesdays or have really tough hours and they get to work really early and get to work really and leave really late. It makes it impossible for people to vote. So early voting, I would also combine with early voting. I would let Election Day be a day off, a federal holiday. So more people can actually take the time to work at the polls, to make sure they get their neighbors to vote, drive homebound seniors to the polls. That's important work for us to do to strengthen our democracy. But beyond all of that, we have to get money out of politics. And the most important thing we can do to instill voting rights is disenfranchise the extraordinary power of the Koch brothers, the extraordinary power of the wealthy elite who pummel money into these campaigns through super PACs, through various organizations that have no disclosure requirements. I am not taking any corporate PAC money. I'm not taking any federal lobbyist money, and I'm not having an individual super PAC. Because all those things just empower those who already have the power already. So let's restore the power to the people. Let's actually bring our democracy back to the direct democracy it was supposed to be. One person, one vote. How about get rid of the Electoral College? How about one person, one vote, so that we are a true representative democracy that is a direct democracy. You also have to put sunlight in, because most people don't know how these laws get written. They do get passed in the dead of night. They do get passed with the federal lobbyists saying, oh, Medicare Part D, let's get in that you can't negotiate in bulk for the lowest price for drugs for Medicare. That's why our seniors pay way too much money for drugs, because all the power was left in the hands of the pharmaceutical companies that, again, are for-profit companies that need to have those quarterly profits, because that's the way our corporate law works today, and not care about you getting the medicine that you actually need or want. They just want those returns for many of them. So getting money out of politics has to be a priority, and then opening up government in a way that we can see it, that we know how these bills are being written. You know, it's an outrage that we don't get to read bills. Like, why not make sure they're published for 7 days? Why not go back to your district and have to tell your constituents about it before you vote on it? How about a little more participation by people about whether it's a good vote or not a good vote? And so shining sunlight into the process, I think would be one of the best disinfectants you could create. But a quick first step is get money out of politics.
We'll go over here next, Senator.
Go ahead.
Hey,
Yes, I'm sorry, Senator. I'm so sorry, but this is going to have to be the last question.
Last question? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I expect you were surprised to find yourself on the same side of an issue as Ben Sass and Ted Cruz and Cotton, and so I'm wondering, why did you vote against the spending bill? You have to, because
Well, they have different reasons than me. I'll tell you my reasons.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I'm sure their reasons are different, but there's always some common ground. You gotta find it.
Yeah, it's surprising, right?
So I voted against it because I don't think it addressed the issue of how President Trump is spending the money at the border. And what I'm most concerned about is Democrats are not afraid of border security. We actually want to have secure borders. We are not afraid of actually funding the work that makes sure we don't have drug traffickers and human traffickers and gun traffickers and terrorism, cross-border terrorism. But what President Trump's been doing is diverting the money for that and giving it to for-profit prisons to lock up children and parents at the border. And I visited some of those facilities, and it's a disgrace. I went to one facility in Texas that was for boys, Henry's age. It was boys 10 to 17, because the minute you turn 18, they just actually deport you. The minute you turn 18, as soon as you turn 18. But this was a Walmart that was constructed with no windows. It was an abandoned Walmart, no windows, into cots for beds. Everything was uniform, no personal effects. All the children had to wear the exact same clothes. They had to walk in lines. What does that sound like to you? It sounds like a prison to me. And I asked, we were not allowed to talk to the children. And so I just stuck a few conversations, and I tried to be nice for the handlers to watch. So what's your favorite time of the day here? You know, that could be a very positive question, right? Outside time. How much time do you get outside? 2 hours a day. What does that sound like? It sounds like a prison. It is not okay. I can't imagine what my son would do if he was sitting in that place not knowing where his mother or father was. I can't imagine the fear, the terror. They don't let them, imagine Theo and Henry in the same facility and they're not allowed to hug each other. No child is allowed to touch another child. The harm that is being caused in these children's lives is irreparable. If they survive it, if they recover, it'll be a miracle. The other facility I went to that was run by GEO, a for-profit prison, was for women and children. The husbands, even if the whole family showed up at the border where they're supposed to come, seeking asylum, they would be separated. So only the moms and the children. Those moms, if they want to call and use those phones, they need money to use the phones. How do they get money? Oh, well, they're allowed to work for $2 a day. They're allowed to work for $2 a day so they can call a lawyer or call a family member or call a sponsor. Are you kidding me? What does that sound like? It sounds like a prison. That is what that is how we are treating people who are seeking our help. This is outrage. So I voted against the bill. because it's putting no caps on the number of beds for these for-profit prisons and any parameters on how he gets to spend his money. So I said no. I said no to him. Yes, well, thank you all for letting me come. I'll be back a lot. Jonathan and Henry and Theo and I are going to have an RV this summer. We'll be in New Hampshire for weeks at a time. If anybody wants to host a house party, just, let Carl know. He'll tell us who wants to host. But I'm really privileged to be in this race, and I really hope I can fight for you. Thank you.